to The Loneliness Industry, the podcast where we decode the societal bullshit that parades as wisdom and serves to keep you stuck. If you're listening for the first time, I'm Jordan Rain, a philosophy graduate with a severe allergy to self-help gurus. My own way out of debilitating loneliness began when I realised that the very discourses claiming to solve our problems really just cleverly perpetuate them. Now, if you're already following, welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm so glad that you are. In this episode, we unpack the third of our foundational Western capitalist values. Just to note, there are far more than three, and we'll be dealing with others down the line. But understanding these values will see us in good stead to start critiquing a lot of the self-development and Western spiritual narratives. And we're up to cognitive primacy. Following that, we'll have competition and heteronormativity. Now, remember that all of these values, they don't hang in isolation. They're part of a broader system of meaning. They reinforce and shape each other, coalescing into what we recognise as good, beneficial, and healthy, and by extension, what we come to think of as bad, harmful, and undesirable. Now, if you haven't already, do go back to the previous episodes, as they are vital in recognising how deeply these values structure the way we think about success, well-being, and particularly personal relationships and connection. And they're all very, very intertwined. This particular value this week is very intertwined with individualism and control. So go back and listen to those if you haven't. Getting to grips with these values gives us the tools we need to recognise when undermining factors are being snuck into the so-called cures for loneliness. Remember Zizek? Not my dog Zizek, Slavoj Zizek, who likes to say that everything contains its own contradiction. And often, when we're being sold an idea that is meant to mitigate our loneliness, it generally contains the very things that will make sure that relief of loneliness cannot happen. So this week, we're dealing with the idea of cognitive primacy. That is roughly the idea that our thoughts come first and our emotions come only as a result of our thoughts. As for all of these values, we're going to be examining three aspects. Firstly, what the hell it is, because this week it's a lot less obvious than previous weeks. Secondly, what its appeal is and what the payoff is. And finally, of course, the shadow side, particularly in relation to loneliness and connection. So what is cognitive primacy? Now, this is a long story littered with philosophical rock stars and very annoying psychologists, so buckle up. Once upon a time, there was a philosopher who actually became a household name. He was kind of the Madonna of the philosophy world, famous, controversial, and with sex appeal that was debatable. So think late Madonna, really, with more thinking and less plastic surgery. Anyway, this philosopher's best-selling lyric went like this: I think, therefore I am, which he released under the name René Descartes. Now, this stunning one-liner set trends worldwide, and for centuries rather than decades or years. With this single, actually twitterable sentence, Descartes laid a pretty much unshakable foundation for the primacy of rationality and mental mastery over the body and emotions. So despite what you might assume, Descartes' idea set way more trends in terms of Western capitalism than nipple tassels and face transplants ever did. But in all seriousness, when Descartes famously declared, I think, therefore I am, he placed reason above everything else. He placed thoughts at the absolute centre of being. In fact, he made thought that which resulted in being. And all that is just to introduce today's core value, cognitive primacy, which is the belief that our thoughts precede and determine our emotions and behaviours, and positions cognition as the primary driver of human experience. Now, psychology distinguishes between cognitive primacy and its so-called opposite, emotional primacy or affective primacy. In psych terms, cognitive primacy is your thoughts cause your feelings. Emotional primacy, your feelings come first and shape your thoughts. So where cognitive primacy is Descartes declaring in deliberate and precise fashion, I think, therefore I am, emotional primacy is more like a baby howling, like pre-thought, pre-language, I feel, therefore something matters. Now, recalling that any value in Western capitalism is tied up with and influenced by all other key values, cognitive primacy is tied up in what we've mentioned before. I think, therefore I am, makes the individualism element pretty clear. But even more than individualism, cognitive primacy is very tied up with our ideas about control. Now I'll go back to last week's episode if you didn't hear the one on control. This control plus cognitive primacy combo forms the basis of two seemingly quite different schools of thought. CBT, for example, which if you're lucky enough to not be familiar with, stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. And it is not only the most widely applied, funded and known of modern therapies, it is also arguably the most representative of Western capitalist values. In CBT, the individual is the locus of control and blame. They are deemed to have the power to change their world by changing their thoughts. Openly and clearly, CBT places the burden of responsibility on the client to fix what is assumed to be broken thinking. Now, the second school of thought with this control-cognitive primacy combo is played on high rotate in self-help and spiritual but not religious circles, and teaches that controlling our thoughts is the first and most important step in controlling our lives. Yes, both CBT and Western spiritualism have the same underlying assumptions. They assume that you, by virtue of thinking crappy thoughts, are fucking up your own life, and that there is a correct way to think, and that doing that correct way of thinking will unfuck your life. Now, I'm itching to do a spoiler here, but you'll have to wait much later to find out why these two apparently quite disparate schools of thought share the same. Now, both of these put cognition, i.e. our thoughts, at the centre of our universe, in a really big bang kind of way too, right? Thoughts create our feelings, and those feelings affect behaviours which affect what we achieve. That is some quite serious causal primacy. The idea also makes it clear that, in order for your cognition to have the desired kind of big bang effect, they must be the right sort of cognitions. And so all that to say what cognitive primacy is, but really it begs a lot more questions, right? What is the right way to think? Who decides? It also glosses over any similar kind of cognitive causality outside of, say, me. What about your cognitive causality? Why would that not affect mine? It also very much ignores other causal factors like our biology, class, race, gender, sexuality, disability, whatever. Anyway, all that in true individualistic fashion. And we will deal with these massive oversights in the coming section on the shadow side. But first, let's look at why Western capitalist culture finds cognitive primacy so appealing. Why we like the idea of cognitive primacy. First, the old familiar joy that we have discussed on several occasions. The idea that we can control, shape and change our life has so much appeal already. If you need this fleshing out, go back to the episode on control and all of the things that we love about it. Imagine someone promising you that we can have control, and just by thinking differently. Change your thoughts, change how you feel, change your life. Not happy? Just think something else. Amazing. Not only does that sound simple, it costs nothing. How incredibly seductive in a world that feels chaotic, overwhelming and expensive. The belief that you can master your internal world with the power of your mind sounds like a super simple recipe for self-efficacy, and a seemingly clear case of cause and effect, of order, of tidiness. How empowering, how neat, how especially comforting when our emotions feel messy, unpredictable or painful. Or when you grow up in a culture or family that teaches you that only a few of the more positive emotions are even okay to have. Or actually a culture that teaches you that showing almost any feeling is a sign of weakness. And yeah, I am looking at you, Germany, on that latter comment. But to be fair to Germans, which admittedly I am not all of the time, this is not just a cultural quirk. It traces back to one of their national treasures, Immanuel Kant. A man so legendarily orderly that it is claimed that he tracked the size and shape of his own bowel movements. If that is not the definition of anal, I don't know what is. Anyway, he was quite a fan of Descartes, and Kant essentially took Descartes' idea of the supremacy of reason and ran a philosophical marathon with it. He didn't just celebrate rationality, he moralized it. For Kant, the good will operates rationally. Thanks to him, reason wasn't just a tool, it became the highest human faculty. He helped enshrine cognition at the heart of ethics, duty, and the Enlightenment ideal of the rational individual. You might see this next part coming already. Alongside the cunts of this world moralizing cognition, cognitive primacy is intricately bound to our old friends, control, and individualism. And as with most things in Western capitalism, the locus of control, is again in the individual. If your problems are the result of faulty thinking, then it's your job to fix them, and your fault if you don't. And this is regardless of whether someone has just punched you in the face or stabbed your child. We're told we can choose our reactions in a purely logical, calculated way, unsullied by the evils of emotion. CBT echoes this in a way that subtly, not really that subtly, masks the moral judgment. You can't have the idea of wrong thinking if it's not a judgment, right? So really it's a more honest cunt who openly states that we are morally lesser if we fail at that controlling and choosing. And why do we like moralizing? It makes us feel good about ourselves. In fact, it makes us feel like we're better people than other people. More on the competition mentality next week. But that's not all. Imagine never having to listen to anyone complain about anything, ever again. Like that old woman next door who never shuts up about her bunions and her endless list of ailments. Seriously, you can tell her and all of your ailing friends that if they would just stop thinking such crappy thoughts, then they could stop being so annoying. And if you want, you can really put the boot in if you truly can't be asked to ever listen to all of the people who you profess to care about. For example, you can tell them that their thoughts are so wrong and toxic to your own carefully constructed bubble of candy floss beliefs and emoji-inspired self-gaslighting. You can be a serious Kantian and claim some moral high ground while you're at it. Quite obviously, this kind of approach, while actually being employed by a lot of Western spiritualists / people who are unaware that they are Kantians, contributes to alienation. If you start telling all your buddies that they can only talk to you if their thinking is correct, as evidenced by their only feeling certain allowed emotions, you'll be friendless pretty quickly. And rightly so, because true connection is about accepting one another for who we are, not accepting one another conditional on lopping off a huge chunk of the human emotional spectrum. We will return to this issue soon, but for now let's summarise why, when Western capitalism took over Descartes and Kant's back catalogue, they were bound to monopolise the ideological market. In exchange for buying into the should of controlling our emotions via controlling our thoughts, we are promised certain advantages. We won't just be happier people, we will also be superior people, and we will have a great excuse to not listen to other people's complaining. We will have an excuse to ignore real, legitimate human woes and brush them off as belonging to someone who is emotionally weak and responsible anyway for sorting their own shit out. And as for the promise of happiness, who doesn't want to feel happy and better than everyone else? That old competition read, I am better than you mentality, more in the next episode. Suffice to say, cognitive primacy offers us the promise of control and of happiness and freedom from negativity, freedom from dissent, and a view of ourselves as emotionally superior. Yay! And now to the shadow side, beginning with a not so often recognised link between good vibes only and the perpetuation of oppression. The idea of the right kind of thinking goes hand in hand with displaying the right kind of emotions. We're taught that certain feelings are a sign of faulty reasoning, as if anger, grief, or despair are just glitches in the system, indicators of irrationality. And this leads to a sort of reduced functionality version of the human being, one who neatly categorizes emotions into good or bad and avoids the bad ones like a virus. Now, if it strikes you as sort of quite black and white thinking, it's because it is. And here's the twist. This regulation of emotion isn't just about managing personal discomfort. It's part of the same machinery that regulates knowledge. When we're told to suppress difficult feelings because they're irrational or unhelpful, we're also being told that the experiences producing those feelings don't count. They don't matter. Emotional expression becomes a disqualifier. How many times have you heard, especially from a gaslighty kind of person, "Oh, you're just being emotional," to write off whatever it was you just said? What's happening here is that the boundary between feeling and knowing has been artificially redrawn, with knowing reframed as something that's always clean, objective, and emotionless. And this is the myth of cognitive primacy too, that real knowledge is disembodied, detached, and sanitized. So when we limit ourselves and others to a narrow band of possible emotions, we're not just soothing our way through a hard day. We're feeding a cultural logic that says only a certain kind of mind, the kind that doesn't cry, doesn't rage, doesn't tremble, is capable of knowing. So hopefully you can see this is not just a matter of how irritating your cousin on Instagram has become with her good vibes only mug and her closet full of unprocessed childhood trauma. This is more than personal avoidance. This is about power. This way of thinking, where emotion is weakness and rationality is truth, props up entire institutions. It decides who gets listened to, who gets believed, and who gets erased. And that brings us to Sarah Ahmed. Ahmed tears down the illusion that institutions are neutral spaces. She shows us how they decide what counts as real knowledge and what gets dismissed as too emotional, too messy, too subjective. Ahmed's work on effective economies and the cultural politics of emotion doesn't just argue for feelings. It exposes how cognitive primacy is a structural weapon. It lets institutions say, only this kind of knowledge counts, the kind that looks rational, the kind that behaves. And who gets to decide what is behaves? Surprise, surprise. Not you, not me. The power to find acceptable knowledge rests with those already benefiting from the current order. People who need to express pain, rage, or grief in order to be heard, that's people seeking justice or healing or recognition, they're told instead that their way of knowing is disordered, that their way of knowing is invalid, their knowledge is invalid, that their trauma is a personal problem and can't be a political one. And that is regardless if they are born into some oppressed ethnic minority or some group that is stigmatized because of its sexuality. Nope. Trauma is your personal problem, not a political one. When the message becomes, we are only interested in clear, objective, dispassionate knowledge, you can conveniently ignore the voices of those most impacted by violence and injustice. You can shut the door on knowledge that bleeds or cries or shits or shakes with rage. You can shut the door on knowledge that lives in the body, that comes from experience, from being black, being queer, being poor, being dispossessed. Instead, you can pathologize it. You can say, you're just angry, you're just irrational. Come back later when you've sorted out your thought processes. So note, the obsession with rationality doesn't just stop your Aunt Karen from crying at work. It doesn't allow you to just ghost people who aren't smiling like a game show host every time they're in your vicinity. It upholds entire systems of exclusion. It protects business as usual. It protects oppression as usual and hands you a smug little superior person badge for achieving what amounts to a kind of inner death. Slavoj Žižek speaks directly to this dynamic. He calls it a form of self-exploitation, where individuals internalize a demand to be endlessly positive and rational rather than demanding real structural change. We stop crying out and start policing ourselves, and in doing so, we become the very tools of our own repression. Now, we're far from done here because there really is a massive reveal that will shock a lot of you. So please stick around for that. Yeah, build up, build up. Suffice to say that so far it is likely clear how all of this impacts our ability to connect. In a world that preaches we must first fix our thoughts, master our emotions, there's no room for shared vulnerability. There is only room to communicate through these masks of fake perfection or what do you expect me to act like. We cannot come together to address collective or individual grief or frustration or anger. We're left alone, thinking that the very fact we're experiencing these emotions at all is some kind of sickness or problem within us. And if we're unlucky enough to be surrounded by the kind of people who jump on the old positivity train as an excuse to never have to be a proper friend to anyone, then we're even told directly that our feeling bad is a burden to others and a sign that we are deeply flawed. We become lonely in our pain, isolated in our supposed inability to control what is often the most genuinely human response to bad shit happening. Really, if you see a kid getting hit by a car and you can stand there saying, oh yeah, I'm going to choose how I react to that. Everything happens for a reason. I'm calm. Then you're being weird. In my opinion, that's kind of weird. The people who are freaking out and trying to resuscitate the kid and running about trying to do whatever they can, they're the ones who are normal, in my opinion. If you're standing there like some kind of sentinel trying to decide how you feel about this, well, I wouldn't be able to distinguish you from an AI. And that really does seem to be what we aspire to. And the more we internalize the idea that only rational knowledge matters, the more we become strangers to each other's realities and our own realities. And that is exactly what keeps these systems of power intact. Not only does cognitive primacy uphold exclusionary structures, it deepens the loneliness of those who encounter real human experiences and is forced to name themselves a problem for their very human reactions. And now, around halfway through this video, here is the incredible flaw in all of the stuff that we've been talking about. And up to this point, maybe you've thought, well, for me personally, it'd be kind of nice if I didn't have to feel these feelings and so on and could control them with my brain. So you might not be convinced up until this particular incredibly important shadow side of cognitive primacy. Let me ask you this as I do the big reveal, okay? Are you sad when you hear the following sentence? Cognitive primacy is bullshit. And I don't mean just like philosophically problematic. I mean empirically incorrect. Really, it's mega, right? This is a mega shadow side of this particular value. For all its shiny packaging and institutional prestige, scientific research has demonstrated it to be false. So brace yourself, right? The next 2 minutes, dry scientific fact. Don't tune out. Decide that you'll find it exciting, okay? And yeah, it's kind of incredible because we still do CBT. We still literally teach cognitive primacy in universities, at least they do in Germany where I'm studying. It's been shown to be false for over 20 years. And we're still learning it because of all the advantages it entails and not because of its truth. I remind you of Foucault, that power structures will decide what we consider to be fact. So, evidence to the contrary of cognitive primacy. Antonio Damasio put it bluntly, we are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think. And here's how science backs him up. Back in 1980, I mean, even I barely remember that, right? This is a long time ago. Robert Zając, and I'm assuming his name's Polish, I don't know. Robert Zając kicked things off by showing that emotions can occur independently of cognition and often precede it. Zając, 1980, page 151. There will be references at the end of this on the blog page. Paul Ekman and Joseph Ledoux added to this with evidence that basic emotions, like fear, can be activated through completely non-cognitive neural pathways. That's Ekman, 1992b, page 550, and Ledoux, 1996, page 164. Ledoux' neuroscience research revealed that emotional stimuli can bypass the higher cognitive regions of the brain altogether. Now, when it comes to more complex emotions, things get a little more entangled, but that still doesn't mean that cognitive primacy wins. It means thought and feeling become intertwined at this level dynamically. And Lisa Feldman Barrett's work shows this very clearly. Cognition and emotion influence one another continuously and inseparably. And that's Barrett, 2006, pages 30 to 32. So even if you're just sitting around catastrophizing about whether your kid is going to fall off their bike and have a serious injury, your emotional state isn't simply caused by bad thoughts. It is part of a system. and not one where cognition gets the steering wheel. And yet we keep pretending otherwise, which leads to the obvious question, if science has moved on, why hasn't Western capitalist culture? And the answer is this: because we don't just hang on to beliefs because they're true, we hang on to them because they're useful. It is useful to believe that we can control our lives with thought. It is useful to institutions that we continue to believe this too. And yes, that is even when hideous atomization and loneliness results. It can be argued that that is a positive emergent effect of the system, because those who cannot come together cannot fight together. They are too busy, preoccupied with thinking these problems are all their own and purely their own. This is where Michel Foucault comes in stage left to hopefully replace Descartes in the philosophical spotlight. Foucault argued that knowledge is always tangled up with power. What counts as truth isn't neutral. It is produced by institutions that benefit from defining it that way, like the uni that teaches psychology and cognitive primacy and will churn out many, many CBT practitioners. Just like pop stars are manufactured to sell records, knowledge is manufactured to serve systems. What is seen as real knowledge reflects the norms that those systems want to uphold. Take healthcare, for instance, and last week I used the example of BMI, still widely used but scientifically discredited as a measure of health. Or we can go back to the CBT example, where universities still teach cognitive primacy so that they can churn out CBT practitioners. And why these two things? They both enforce a certain norm. And norms, as Foucault reminds us, serve power. Cognitive primacy works the same way. It is not just a model, it is a mechanism of control. If you believe that your thoughts control your life, then you're also believing that any suffering you experience is your own fault. If you're not okay, you must be thinking wrong. That message doesn't just disempower, it disciplines. It disciplines you for having wrong thoughts. It disciplines you to find fault with yourself and not the system. And I'm going to return to CBT because this is something I've personally experienced, as have a lot of the people I know. Cognitive behavioral therapy, the high priest of institutionalized cognitive primacy. It is the most widely funded and deployed form of therapy in the Western world, largely because it's cheap and short term, but it also aligns perfectly with capitalist values. It says your feelings are the result of faulty thoughts. Fix your thoughts with the help of a superior person, the therapist, who knows what right thinking is. Fix those thoughts with them and the feelings will sort themselves out. Now, within a Foucauldian lens, CBT functions as a normalizing force. It doesn't ask why someone might be grieving or alienated or furious at injustice. It asks how they can reframe those feelings into more socially acceptable ones. So, like, imagine you've got your hand on a hot plate, right, and it's burning. The CBT approach isn't to help you get your hand off the hot plate. It is to help you think differently about the searing pain of your burning flesh. It asks you to think differently about the brutal, hurtful facts and do nothing to change those facts, but to change your reaction to them. And this gets dangerous fast. If you are in a relationship with an abuser or a narcissist, for example, you might go to CBT for support, and you're likely to be told that the solution lies in reframing your reaction. Perhaps the person didn't mean it that way. Perhaps you're jumping to conclusions. Your thinking might be wrong on this, rather than recognizing that someone is manipulating and gaslighting you. Now, this has happened to me personally. This has happened to friends that I know. It's not a fluke. It's a feature of the model. The implicit message is this: if you're hurting, it's because you failed to think properly. Now, that's not just false, it is profoundly unsafe. Now, I want to touch on something that Ahmed brings up, and this is other kinds of knowledge, right? Because we are so indoctrinated into the system. We think, how can there be other kinds of knowledge? Rational facts are rational facts. What other kinds of knowledge are there? I'm going to talk about something called phenomenology. If you can't say it, think of the Muppet Show, phenomenology, It's the only way I could figure out how to say it. Anyway, whole philosophical traditions like phenomenology have been telling us for over a century that knowing doesn't start with thinking. It starts with feeling, sensing, and being in the body. Now, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, one of my personal favourites, said that we know the world through lived embodied experience. A baby doesn't cry because it's made some rational assessment of a situation. It cries because it feels something, and meaning arises through that emotional encounter, not after it. And in this kind of view, emotions aren't distractions from knowing. They're how we know. Now, here is why all of this is both personal and political. When emotions are dismissed and treated as a symptom of poor thinking, people get cut off from themselves and each other. The idea that you should fix your feelings alone, and often with a worksheet, if you've done CBT, there's a lot of worksheets. You're doing this on your own. Instead of exploring those feelings with another human being and exploring what those feelings are pointing to, this creates institutional loneliness. As Sarah Ahmed reminds us, emotions are political. They shape how our bodies move through the world, who gets heard, who gets erased. When institutions tell you what emotions are acceptable, they're also telling you who gets to belong. Those who are exhibiting the right feelings. Those who have scalpeled out the wrong kinds of feelings from their emotional repertoire. So if you're feeling disconnected and isolated, and like you're doing it wrong, it is not a personal failure. It's a feature of the system designed to keep us alone and with our pain, gaslit into thinking it's a mindset problem. Gaslit into thinking that cognitive primacy is actually a real thing. So given that this one, cognitive primacy, is such a deep-seated falsehood that we base so many things on, I'm going to move into counteracting it from awareness to resistance. So this section is called Counteracting Cognitive Primacy from Awareness to Resistance. For a start, call out the lie. Go to littlelonelinessindustry.net. On the backwards blog page is a transcript, and there are these studies at the end that I am citing with the pages. Call out the lie. It's not just a bad idea, this value, this core value in Western capitalist culture. It's false. And stemming from that, the next layer up on the pyramid, the notion that thought is superior to feeling. And that idea is not neutral. It's cultural propaganda. It pathologizes pain. It individualizes responsibility. It obscures the system. So call it out. In therapy, in conversation, in your own mind. Second, embrace emotional necessity. Emotions aren't bugs in the system. They're core code. They're how we form relationships, how we detect them, how we register meaning. If it wasn't for rage, for example, we would have no black rights movement, we'd have no gay rights movement, we'd have no women's rights at all. If people didn't get angry about injustice, yet anger is one of the most pathologized emotions that we know of. Stop treating emotions as obstacles to rationality. They are what make rationality matter. Which brings me to the third point, empowerment through emotion. To feel deeply is not weakness, it's resistance. In Foucault's terms, refusing emotional discipline is an act of defiance. It's saying, my emotional response is valid. The system that says otherwise, that's what's broken. Now in summary, first of all, thank you for listening to almost the full episode. We're nearly there. Cognitive primacy flatters us with a dream that we can be clean, ordered, rational minds in full control of our messy, wild interiors, that our thoughts are key to happiness, success, healing, and even moral worth. It tells us that if we just think the right thoughts, we can fix our feelings, our lives, and ourselves. But that dream is an unscientific lie. Cognitive primacy is not just outdated or scientifically shaky. It is a cultural weapon. It is a manufactured illusion, a deeply embedded lie that individualizes blame, neutralizes dissent, and erases emotion as a legitimate form of knowing. It tells us that emotional pain is a thinking error, that systemic injustice is a mindset problem, That grief, rage, despair, and even joy must be filtered through the right kind of cognition in order to count. It sells us the illusion of control while quietly erasing the truth of our lived, embodied emotional experience. This lie doesn't just confuse us, it isolates us. It tells you that your pain is a personal failure and that your feelings are inappropriate, that you're the only one not managing correctly. So instead of reaching out, you retreat. You feel shame, not solidarity. You try and regulate your tears instead of asking why you're alone with them in the first place. You try to fix yourself instead of questioning the system that made you feel broken. That is the loneliness that cognitive primacy creates. A loneliness of self-surveillance, of disconnection, of feeling like no one else is struggling because no one else is allowed to show it. And so we become cut off not just from one another, but from ourselves. We begin to see our own humanity, our emotional depth, our vulnerability, our rawness as a liability. But here's the truth. Emotion is not weakness. Emotion is wisdom. Emotion is resistance. Your anger might be telling you that something is unjust. Your grief might be honoring something that mattered to you. Your fear might be naming something real. These are not malfunctions, they're signals, they are intelligence, they are the truth. And choosing to honor them, to feel them, to share them, that is rebellion. In a system built on the lie that only dispassionate minds deserve to be heard, simply showing up as your full feeling self is radical. Listening to others with emotional openness is revolutionary. Creating spaces where people can cry, rage, tremble without shame, that is how we begin to dismantle the system that thrives on our alienation. So no, you don't need to fix your thoughts to be worthy. You don't need to be calm, smiling, or rational to deserve connection. You don't need to tuck your humanity away to be taken seriously. You are not failing for feeling deeply. You are being human. And maybe the most radical act in the face of this lie is to believe that your feelings are not only valid, but necessary. And with that, dear listeners, thank you for listening to this 4th episode of The Loneliness Industry. If you would like to support the podcast, please go to thelonelinessindustry.net. There's a donation button there. Or you can go to jordanrain.com. There's a whole bunch of music there. I don't do music anymore, but there are more than 12 releases there. And you can buy all of them in a bundle. If you just click on the links, it'll take you to Bandcamp. So buying any of that music will support the podcast. Only from Bandcamp. Don't buy anything from Spotify or iTunes. It doesn't help any musician ever. You know this already, I think. But yeah, thank you again so much for the comments and the support. It's really wonderful to be able to meet you guys in this space. Now, if you are enjoying the podcast, please do share it with friends. Share the link or the iTunes link, whatever link you feel is appropriate, so that it can get to more people. Unfortunately, loneliness is a real issue, and I don't know how easy it is to find podcasts like this one. I certainly had difficulty finding anything to help my loneliness. So if you do have friends or acquaintances that you think might benefit, please do share the podcast with them. It would be wonderful to be able to interact with them as well, or just provide a place where they feel better and are not blaming themselves for their own isolation. So thank you again, guys. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you soon. Bye.